Yeah. Hello, everyone. So I'm Mary, and I'm coming from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. And today I'm going to present a research which I've done as part of the Migrant Life Project, which is led by Professor Hilkulu and also Gunnar Andersson from Stockholm University and Hilkulu from University of St. Andrews. And today I'm going to present about the first-time home ownership across the immigrants' generations and origins and their descendants in Sweden. So just to give you a brief introduction, home ownership presents wealth and higher quality of life, and it's also considered as an important indicator of immigrant integration in the host society. And so using large administrative longitudinal data from Sweden, we assessed the association between moving into first-time home ownership and immigrant groups and generations. So what we did is that we differentiated between generations of immigrants, whereby we considered first-generation immigrants, or 1G, as those who immigrated to Sweden at age of 18 plus. And then we have the 1.5 generation, or 1.5G, and those are immigrants who immigrated to Sweden at age of less than 18 years old, so as children. And then also we separate the descendants of immigrants into two groups, into 2G or second generation, and those have two foreign-born parents, and the 2.5 generation have only one foreign-born parent. So we separate those from the rest of the Swedish-born population. And then we classify immigrants and their descendants by the country of origin. Now for the 2.5 generation, because technically they have one foreign-born and one Swedish-born, so they follow the one foreign-born parent in the country of origin classification. And for the second generation descendants of immigrants who have two foreign-born parents from different countries of origin, we chose that of the mom because usually children spend more time with the mom while raising up. And then we analyze two outcomes of first-time home ownership. In the first outcome, we focus on both apartments and single-family home ownership, whereas in the second outcome, we just focus on the single-family home ownership. And just to give you some theoretical background of housing and immigration, so what influences it? So immigration and housing can be influenced by cultural, by social, by financial, and by political institutional factors. So cultural factors, for example, they include housing preferences, for example, having attachment to the host country versus having attachment to the country of origin. So all of these influence how immigrants and their descendants choose whether to own a home in Sweden or not. And then we have social factors, and those include, for example, discrimination in the housing market, ethnic segregation, and place stratification versus spatial assimilation and integration. And then we have financial factors, and those, of course, include resources and wealth, which is really important when one has to purchase a house. And finally, you have political institutional factors, and those include some housing policies in place and the housing market in Sweden. So based on the literature, we derived three main hypotheses for this research. So the first one is that we expect to see slower entry into first-time home ownership among immigrants from low and middle income countries compared to native Swedes. The second hypothesis was that we expect to see similar or faster entry into first-time home ownership among immigrants from high-income countries compared to native Swedes. And the third hypothesis is that we expect to see closer rates of entry into first-time home ownership to that of native Swedes the more we advance in generations. So among the 1.5G, second G, and 2.5G compared to the first-generation immigrants, especially for individuals who have origins from high-income countries, which we expect to see gradual assimilation in the home ownership patterns. So methods, we relied on individual level data from a Swedish registry, from Statistics Sweden, and basically we had all the population in Sweden, so it's really large, a huge data set. And this included our data set, all individuals born in Sweden, and the 1.5 generation immigrant who became 18 between January 1997 and December 2016. So this is the period where we focused our analysis. And also we included all individuals born in Sweden and 1.5G who are still living with the parents in 1997 and age more than 18. And also we included all immigrants who arrived in Sweden between 1997 and 2016. And for analysis, we use survival analysis, basically Cox proportional hazards models with age since 18 as a baseline. So this is just a simple Lexis diagram to show how the data was structured. But basically, like the data was structured, and we censored like individuals. If they emigrate out of Sweden, we censor them. And then also censoring due to death and other factors. And in total, we followed more than 3 million individuals over a period of up to 240 months, which corresponds to 20 years between 1997 and 2016. So now I'll go to the results, which is the fun part. So first of all, I have here a Kaplan-Meier estimate for first-time apartments and single-family homeownership. And the x-axis shows years since age 18 or immigration to Sweden for the first-generation immigrants. And as we can tell from this graph, first of all, if we look just for the first generation immigrants, we can see that many of them actually like around 50%, like it can go to 50% for those immigrants from Nordic, Western Europe, and North America and Oceania. They go into home ownership directly upon arrival in Sweden, in the first year of arrival in Sweden. And also the second thing we notice from this graph is that we see this gradual assimilation in home ownership. So we see that the fastest rates of entry into first-time home ownership is observed among native Swedes, and then it's followed by Nordic, Western Europe, North America, 2.5G. And then we see, like, for example, 1.5 and 2G and 2.5G from rest of world countries. They have the slowest entry into first-time home ownership. And then this graph here, it's exactly the same, but here we focus only on entry into single-family home ownership. And also we can see some of the first-generation immigrants, especially those arriving from Europe and North America, they enter directly into single-family home ownership in the first year of arrival to Sweden. And also we see the similar pattern of gradual assimilation across the generations. So here, I tried to put the co-off plots of the Cox regression in a graph because I had so many categories. But basically, this graph is showing the association between first-time apartments and single-family home ownership and the immigrant groups and generations. So in the first part of the graph, this is for first-generation immigrants, and we can see that immigrants from Western Europe and from Nordic countries and North America, they have higher hazards of entry into first-time home ownership compared to the native Swedes, which are the comparison category. Whereas we can see, for example, that first-generation immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa, they have the lowest hazard ratios of entry into first-time home ownership. As we go like down, we see like the second part of the graph is like for 1.5G, and then we have for the second generation, we see that the hazard ratios are becoming nearer toward the native Swedish population. And then if we look at the 2.5G at the bottom of the graph, we see that those show the closest hazard ratios of entry into first-time apartment and single-family home ownership compared to native Swedes. So this shows that we have gradual assimilation. However, we can see that some groups still lag behind. So this shows also that there is some stratification based on the countries of origin. And a similar story is shown also when we focus only on entry into first-time single-family homeownership. So the same story as well. We see that first-generation immigrants from Western Europe and Nordic and North America, they show higher hazard ratios of entry to first-time single-family homeownership compared to native Swedes, whereas, for example, Sub-Saharan African first generation show the lowest hazards of entry into first-time homeownership. And we see also this gradual assimilation in the homeownership patterns for the 2.5G, showing the closest hazard ratios. Also here I wanted to show like what other factors were associated with movement into home ownership. So I summarized them instead of showing big graphs. But basically individuals who were more likely to move to first-time home ownership belonged to older cohorts where females were pregnant with up to 3 children, had a higher income and higher education, and were in marital partnership and were living outside large cities. So finally, because like if you remember the Kaplan-Meier graphs here, we see that a high proportion of first-generation immigrants, they go into first-time home ownership in their first year, like upon arrival in Sweden. So we wanted to discover, like to do some analysis on this. So we just took the first year for first-generation immigrants in Sweden, and then we ran a logistic regression to test the association between first-time apartments and single-family home ownership and the different groups of first-generation immigrants in their first year of immigration in Sweden. And basically we can see that those belong mostly to Western European, and here we are comparing to Nordic immigrants. So here the reference category is Nordic. So it's mostly Nordic and Western Europeans are the ones who are owning home ownership in their first year, and also North America. And then we can see the lowest rates or hazard ratios are for Middle Eastern and for Southeast Asia. And finally, this is the same table, but this is for single-family home ownership. And here we can see that Western Europe have higher ratios of owning home ownership compared to Nordic, but it's mostly like, yeah, for Western Europe and Nordic countries. And finally, like just to give conclusion and take-home messages out of this presentation. So in summary, using large-scale register data from Sweden, our study showed a gradual housing assimilation across the migrant generations. However, the home ownership levels still varied across the migrant groups, which supports some segmentation, which could be attributed to socio-cultural and economic heterogeneities across the countries of origins. So that's it. Thank you for listening. Looking forward for questions.